He's not. He thinks it's all under his control and his hands. But he recognizes that God wants him to do something. Isn't it amazing? A guy who doesn't worship God, doesn't believe that Yahweh is the one true God, still believes that God has something for him to do? How many people do we know, that love God and still wonder whether or not God has something for him to do? He does! God wants to do something with each and every one of us. Cyrus recognizes that. Whoever is among you, all of his people, may his God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and rebuild the house of the Lord, the God of Israel. Why? Get this. He is the God who is in Jerusalem. Cyrus even recognizes that God's presence is there, that God cares especially for Jerusalem, that God is in control of everything there. God wants to do something with Joliet as well. He doesn't have us here by accident. He doesn't have each and every church in Joliet there just because. They're not just there just to do church. God has a purpose for each and every church that's in Joliet, us included, because He wants to do something here. He wants to redeem people. And He wants to use us to grow and expand His kingdom. It's not just our city. It's God's city, too. Just like Jerusalem is. Cyrus recognizes that Jerusalem is God's city in the Old Testament during this time period. We know that Joliet is just as much God's city as they were back then. He wants to do something here. God wants to build our city. And He wants to use the church to do it. We should see the importance of the church in the community as Cyrus did. Verse 4, and let each survivor, in whatever place he sojourns, be assisted by the men of his place with silver and gold, with goods and with beasts, besides free will offerings for the house of the God that is in Jerusalem. So now Cyrus is saying, okay, I want you guys to go back. I want you to rebuild your city. I'm giving you permission to do it. When you're there, maybe throw up some prayers for me, put in a good word with the big guy. And just go ahead and do your thing. That's fine. You have my permission. I encourage it. And when you go, I want you to actually ask all your neighbors and everybody who's involved with it to give you the resources to be able to do that. That's what he says in verse 4. He sees the importance of them rebuilding the temple within their community. He sees the importance of them reestablishing the religious heartbeat of the people. And he says, get people to help you to do that. Go get resources, and let each survivor in whatever place he sojourns, wherever he goes, be assisted by the men of his place with silver and gold, and so forth and so on. He says, beside free will offerings for the house of God that is in Jerusalem. Cyrus recognized the importance of the church in the community. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. We see that God wants to rebuild the city. He wants to build the city in which He has us right now. He wants to do something with us here. He wants us to make a difference and make an impact in the lives of the city and be a presence. He wants us to be a presence. He wants us to make known His presence in the city of Joliet. There's a song that's become very popular in recent years in Christian circles in particular. It's called God of the City. This particular song was written by a band called Blue Tree, but it was made popular by Chris Tomlin. And Chris Tomlin is friends with this band Blue Tree, and they're from Northern Ireland, from Belfast. That's Blue Tree. That's where this group is from, and they're the ones who wrote the song. Now, they were performing over in Belfast when Chris Tomlin ran into them, and Blue Tree shared with Chris Tomlin the origin of where this particular song came from, God of the City. Apparently, this song was written and came about when the band Blue Tree, for reasons unknown, was in a brothel and bar in Thailand. Now, I don't know any more details about why that was happening, but nonetheless, for argument's sake, we'll say the band was there in this particular brothel bar in Thailand, and the owner of this place he found out that the guys, Blue Tree, they were in a band. So he asked them if they'd be willing to perform there in the bar. And so, of course, these guys, seeing the opportunity to praise and worship God there, got up and more or less began to riff some songs there in the midst of the bar. And for some reason, this song spontaneously came out of the band of the singer. He was led to sing this particular song, God of the City. And it's interesting. He says that Aaron Boyd of Blue Tree told me that in the middle of their set of songs, the song just spontaneously birthed. God put this powerful lyric on their lips in that moment. Greater things have yet to come, and greater things are still to be done in this city. And I'm sure it's probably running through most people's heads right now who have heard it because it's kind of a catchy tune. But the truth is the same there as it is here. God still does want to do great things here. It's easy to write off Joliet as a dark, dank place where people don't care about God or they care about some kind of religious formalism that deals with God. But really, Joliet, there's more to that here. There's hope here. There's hope here. But God wants to work in the hearts of His people here to build that city. And He wants to do it through us. The first thing that God wants to build with us here is the city of Joliet. The next thing that God wants to build with us, is our place of worship. Some of you guys are going, yeah, that sounds great. We'll take a church. I'm inclined to agree. It'd be nice to have one of those. And for many people, that's a very important thing. For some people, that's actually too important, believe it or not. And for some people, it's not important enough. You're going to find people all over the gambit who feel differently about whether or not you should have a building, what kind of building. You can go on and talk about it and discuss it, and forever and ever and ever. But the fact remains, God does want us to have a place of worship. He wants to build a place of worship for us. We get so focused on trying to figure it out on our own and make everything work out that we forget sometimes that God is the one who wants to build that place of worship for us. And He wants us to turn to Him and trust Him and look to Him to build that for us. He'll use us to do it, yes, but it's not up to us. God could rebuild a majestic temple, a huge temple, and reestablish a sacrificial system and do all of that. Why do we sometimes forget that He can build a church without us? But He can. He can do it. And He will. He wants to build us a place of worship. God is working in our hearts today. He's calling us to prioritize corporate worship above all other things. And that's what we see that He did in the life of His people as well. He leads them out of slavery and bondage. He leads them out of Babylon to go back home again. And in verse 5 we see after this proclamation is given, after Cyrus, his heart is moved and he tells the people, you're going home and you're going to get people to help you do it. And you can go back to your homeland and rebuild all your stuff and everything. In verse 5 he says, then rose up the heads of the fathers' houses of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests and the Levites, everyone whose spirit God had stirred to go up to rebuild the house of the Lord that is in Jerusalem. So God was moving in Cyrus' heart, and He's moving in the hearts of the leaders of the tribes and the leaders of the nation. And what is the first thing that they want to do? They don't talk about going and rebuilding the walls or going and rebuilding, the movie theater, the sports multiplex. They don't talk about going and rebuilding the military or all these things. The very first thing that God works in the heart of His people to do is rebuild the church. Well, it was the temple for them, but to us it would be the church today. To rebuild their place of worship. It was a priority in their hearts, and God put that priority there. And it's the first thing that they do. It's their first goal, and His people are stirred up and led to do that. God's working in our hearts, and He's calling us to prioritize the time of corporate worship. This is why we do everything here. This time of coming together and lifting our hearts in unison to God. Unfortunately, so much of worship today has become individualized, and it's become about you and God. But throughout Bible history, throughout all the ways that God has built and established His church and even His people in the Old Testament, it's always been about the corporate whole, coming together in unity and worshiping as a body. And God wants this to be a priority above all other things in life. And it was a priority for His people. This was a step of faith for them. At this point, they had no way to protect themselves. They had no walls at this point in order to keep out invading armies. They had no ways to protect against other people who might come in and cause trouble. They were just stepping out and they were going, and the first thing they rebuilt before their houses even was they were working toward rebuilding the temple, rebuilding the place of corporate worship. That was their priority. So we see that God wants that to be our priority as well. He does.